Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Do nuclear weapons make the world more safe or less safe? Today we're going to be talking about nuclear weapons and the ramifications of having 15,000 of them on planet Earth. My guest today is an expert in this area. Alice Slater is the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation's representative in New York City. Ms. Slater, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
I'm delighted to be here.
I appreciate you being with me today. We're going to get into nuclear weapons in just a few minutes, but you're involved in some really interesting groups, and I want to just mention a couple of them. I mentioned that you're the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation's New York representative. What is that group about? Just
well,
briefly.
It was formed in 1982 to eliminate nuclear weapons on the planet and to work for peace on Earth. And they've been doing conferences and panels. They organized the first Abolition 2000 network that wound up getting a treaty to eliminate nuclear weapons, and they just brought a very big case in the courts on the Marshall Islands, that the Marshall Islands suffered all from the nuclear testing, and they brought a lot of publicity. Not that any judge gave us a good verdict, but it got a lot of publicity. So.
And this was the nuclear testing back in the 40s and 50s?
No, even after the war, when we would, we went from the nuclear bomb to the hydrogen bomb. We never stopped. We never stopped.
Well, that leads us into another organization that you're involved in, but I will mention your website before we move. It's wagingpeace.org. You're also a member, you're a member of a lot of organizations here, and one is A World Beyond War. What is that group about?
This is wonderful. It started about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's trying to up the ante to make the end of war on the planet an idea whose time has come. It's like war is so 20th century. We haven't had a good war since World War II,
Is there a good war?
Well, people said World War II was good. We defeated Hitler. People felt good about it. But our country is in so many wars, the United States, and we haven't won a war since then,
There are quite a few of them, exactly. And that website is World Beyond War.
Right.
.org, so our viewers can go to that. Well, on Human Rights Day, December 10th, 2017, we saw that the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. What is this organization? International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. What is that organization about, and what is the significance of them winning the Nobel Peace Prize?
This is so amazing. It's been a 10-year campaign within 450 organizations in 100 countries all around the world that went and got a treaty negotiated at the UN General Assembly that said nuclear weapons are illegal, they're prohibited, they should be banned, they can't be used, you can't threaten to use them. Now, we've done that for biological and chemical weapons, but we never did it for nuclear weapons because we have this very ineffective non-proliferation treaty where the 5 nuclear weapon states ganged up on the rest of the world, US, Russia, England, China, and France, and promised to give up their nuclear weapons if everybody else promised not to get them. And everyone signed that treaty except India, Pakistan, and Israel, so they got them. North Korea was a member, and then this treaty had this Faustian bargain to give everybody peaceful nuclear power, which is basically giving someone the keys to the bomb factory. So North Korea got their peaceful nuclear power and left and made a bomb. Iran was on the way. That's what this deal with Iran is. They promised not to enrich the nuclear waste product of a nuclear reactor, which is how you make a nuclear bomb, and that's the hardest part. The mechanics are easy. It's getting the materials. And in this insane treaty, we're actually giving Saudi Arabia nuclear power these days. I mean, they never had it before. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Turkey, these are countries that want their bombs in the basement. So the non-proliferation treaty is going nowhere. And meanwhile, we have this new ban treaty that's creating a new legal norm throughout the world. The amazing thing, they won the Nobel Peace Prize. The people that accepted the prize, this young 34-year-old Swedish woman who was the executive director, she had a baby while this was going on. And we had Beatrice
while she was in Oslo receiving...
No, during the 10 years, and she was the director.
Okay.
But she was a young woman. And then we had Setsuko Thurlow, who was a survivor of Hiroshima. She was 84. Very articulate. She survived the bomb in Hiroshima, married a Canadian, wound up as a sociologist in Canada, and came to all our UN meetings when we were negotiating the treaty, and she was so articulate. So those two women accepted the prize for the campaign. It was fabulous.
And that was the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, this year.
It was
this
given
December.
in Oslo, and you attended.
I was there. I could tell you this funny story. My daughter was staying with me, and the phone rings at 5:30 in the morning. My daughter lives in California. I'm in New York, and she was sleeping over. And it rings at 5:30, and my friends in Australia, Tilman Ruff, who was the director of the campaign, he's with the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. He was the chairman of the steering committee. They called me, they said, Alice, we won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I'm like screaming, and I'm so happy. And my daughter comes in, Mom, who's calling so early in the morning, and why are you screaming? I said, we won the Nobel Peace Prize. So she said, oh, you have to go to Oslo. I said, no, it's too dark. She said, I'll go with you. So my daughter went with me to Oslo, and we were in the service with the ceremony.
I'm sure it was very inspirational and very moving,
it was wonderful.
Extremely exciting. This is so important, these issues. You mentioned the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That really is sort of the foundation for trying to contain, or at least develop the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. What can be done outside of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council actually getting serious about dealing with Articles 4 and 6 of the treaty and actually doing what they said they were going to do? But what can be done to strengthen that treaty?
Well, we think the ban treaty is going to make a difference because the U.S. in its NATO alliance, which is very provocative to Russia, you know, we promised Gorbachev we wouldn't expand it, and now it's on Russia's border. But we keep nuclear weapons in 5 NATO countries: Belgium, Germany, Holland, Turkey, and Italy. And there are groups that were part of the ban treaty that are now saying, listen, these weapons are illegal, they're prohibited, we got to get them out of here. So that's going to put pressure on the U.S. not to be able to count on their allies to carry their nuclear bombs. You know, this treaty was passed by 122 nations.
Now we're talking about the
ban treaty, but none of the NATO countries or the 5 permanent reps members, or the 5 people that promised to give up, none of those countries were there. And this is so interesting. The first vote in the UN General Assembly in September that said let's have negotiations in March and in the summer, that first vote to put it forth to the General Assembly, it was the UN Committee on Disarmament. The 5 Western states voted no: U.S., England, France, Israel, and Russia. But India, Pakistan, and China abstained. And guess what? North Korea voted yes to ban the bomb. Nobody reported this. It wasn't on the front page of the New York Times. And they were obviously trying to get some attention. They were standing out from all the other nuclear weapon states, and they voted yes. By the time it got to the General Assembly, nobody was voting for it because by then Trump was president and everything was so nuts that they just went back to their old positions. But that one vote was an opportunity to think that maybe Asia's going to lead the way. You know, maybe they'll lead the way and put pressure on the Western nuclear states. What
will come out of this nuclear weapon ban treaty that will help make the world safer, that hopefully will reduce the nuclear stockpile? And we're going to get into this upgrading of nuclear weapons in just a minute, but what will this treaty do to help stabilize the situation and to reduce the nuclear weapons, assuming that the more nuclear weapons you have, the greater the chance of some accident, the greater the fear that there will be some type of exchange? But what can it do?
Well, it's going to stigmatize the bomb, so we might be able to get it out of the 5 NATO countries, which will be a blow to the NATO alliance. We also have a wonderful new campaign launch, Don't Bank on the Bomb. That's the website, don'tbankonthebomb.com, and that's a divestment campaign. So we're going to banks, we're going to universities, we're going to pensions and saying they have all the lists of all the nuclear weapons manufacturers and who's making, and it's not just the weapons, it's the missiles that deliver them and the submarines and the airplane. You know, there's a whole infrastructure that goes with the nuclear weapons, and we're going to try to make, start to hurt people in the western states that aren't really willing to give up the bomb yet, but maybe it'll hurt them financially. So there's a lot of good initiatives beginning over this.
You've followed this issue closely for many years now, decades probably. A lot of people refer back to the good old days. When we think back to the, quote, not so good old days of the Cold War, but in retrospect, maybe they weren't all that bad. But you had the old Soviet Union, the U.S. and their allies. They went in different directions. But we were pretty much guaranteed there would not be an exchange of nuclear fire between those two entities. Today, we're not so sure with other parties, non-state parties getting perhaps nuclear technology and things like that. But during that period, there were like at least 12 reported incidents of almost accidents, of accidental exchanges that could have decimated the planet. Were there not?
This is the real problem. I doubt even Trump is not going to push the nuclear button, nor Putin's not going to push the nuclear button. There's going to be an accident. We've just been lucky. I saved a congressional record in my archives that showed 38 airplane crashes carrying nuclear bombs. When General Lee Butler came into, he was, I think, under Clinton, or I don't know which president, but he grounded all the planes. Imagine, they were crashing, carrying nuclear bombs. Luckily, none of them ever went off. One of them spewed a little plutonium in Palomares, Spain, and another one in Thule, Greenland. There's one off the coast of Georgia. We still don't know where it is.
That's encouraging.
Then they made a movie, The Man Who Saved the World, about Colonel Petrov in the Russian missile silo that saw an incoming possible U.S. nuclear attack. And his orders were let go all the nuclear weapons against, New York, Washington. And he said, no, must be a mistake. And he was right. It was a computer glitch. We had, about 3 years ago, planes missing from North Dakota with missiles loaded with nuclear weapons. They didn't even know they were gone. They flew to Louisiana, and they were parked for 36 hours before they realized that they had sent nuclear weapons by plane. I mean, we're just lucky. So it's time to stop it, and start. We know how to get rid of them. We've gotten rid of a lot of them with Russia. But right now, Russia's, they're very antagonized by NATO expansion. Gorbachev offered Reagan to get rid of all our nuclear weapons if you don't do Star Wars, and Star Wars wouldn't do it.
This situation is very, it's not under our control in many cases, and that's the challenge. I remember Albert Einstein, I'll have to paraphrase this, but he said with the nuclear weapons, if you fight World War III with nuclear weapons, he said, I don't know exactly what, but you'll fight World War IV with sticks and stones because the world will be decimated. It will be uninhabitable, it will be unlivable, living creatures, most will not survive it. But there are people who actually believe we will survive this, are there not?
Well, I mean, there are people that had the bunker mentality. They're building their bunker somewhere. But the reason that the ban treaty got passed was because there was incredible research being done on climate effects of even 100 nuclear bombs going off, let alone the 14,000. That it would create a global winter and there would be famine and we would, it could really destroy all life on Earth. It's almost... We're facing two existential threats now, climate change and nuclear destruction. It could be catastrophic, so it's time to ban the bomb. It definitely is.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We would invite our viewers to go to our website at www.Global Connections Television to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a website and you'd like to share our programs, please do so. Global Connections Television is provided free of charge as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today we're taking a look at the proliferation of nuclear weapons and what can be done about it. And my guest is an expert in this area. My guest is Ms. Alice Slater. Alice Slater is the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation's New York representative. Alice, we got so many things we've talked about here to unpack in a very short time frame, but one, the country, especially the United States and Russia, there are 15,000 nukes, or I think those two countries have 14,000 of them, or roughly.
Right.
They're talking about upgrading their nuclear technology, creating new nuclear weapons. The United States said it would cost $1 trillion. We've seen that that has never been the case. There are always cost overruns when they get into these military programs. They'd probably be $1.5, $2 trillion, which is a huge amount of money over 10, 20, 30-year period. What should these countries be looking at doing at this point? Now that they see that their old nuclear weapons are deteriorating, they're aging, they're falling apart, they're getting dangerous, what should they do?
Well, I think it's up to America, because I think Russia has always been reacting to us. I've been looking at this. Stalin asked Truman after World War II to turn the bomb over to the United Nations when we formed the United Nations with, you know, the end of war on the planet.
In 1945.
And we said no. So he went and got his own. Gorbachev, as I said earlier, asked Reagan when he let go of the whole Eastern Europe without a shot. It was like a miracle, the way the Soviet Union just let go of those countries without war, you know, go, be free. He said, let's get rid of nukes, but don't do Star Wars, and Reagan wouldn't agree. Putin offered Clinton to cut our, then it was like 18,000 nuclear weapons to 1,000 each, and call everybody to the table and negotiate, but don't put missiles in Eastern Europe. And Clinton refused. Bush walked out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty that we had with Russia, which was with the Soviet Union, that we would not build anti-missiles so we could stop the missile race. He just walked out of it, and we're in a new missile race. China and Russia have proposed in 2008 and in 2015 a treaty to keep weapons out of space. In the Committee on Disarmament in Geneva, where you need consensus to even discuss an issue, the U.S. blocks any discussion. And when we destroyed Iran's enrichment program with Israel, with the Stuxnet virus about 6 years ago, we boasted that we had knocked it out. Russia proposed to the U.S., this was on the front page of the New York Times, that we negotiate a cyber war ban treaty, and we turned them down. So the ball's in the U.S. court and their allies. It's up to us. And Putin now is coming forth, just today, they announced, with a new, more super missile, but he's doing that because of all the threats they've had from us. So I think Russia would be very willing. North Korea is willing. I mean, they're willing.
Two hot spots.
If we would just, if we could shift our way, you know, we're telling the truth about statues and Columbus and male assaults. Let's tell the truth about U.S. and Russia and what our role is in the war-making machine.
Well, this is a discussion we certainly need to have. You mentioned Iran and you mentioned North Korea. With what little time we have left, let's try to at least touch on one of them, Iran. How important is that agreement that was to cap the Iranian program, basically to shut it down for the time being? It was adopted, I think, 2015, if memory serves. How important is that, and how important is it to keep it going so that Iran does not become a nuclear power?
Very important. I mean, like, this was like a miracle. You know, first of all, they were under no legal obligation to stop because the NPT gives them the right.
The
for peaceful nuclear,
treaty.
yeah, the non-proliferation treaty gives everybody the right to peaceful nuclear power. So, you know, then we come in and we try to stop them from enriching it. But we didn't stop Japan. Japan enriched it. You know, we have countries that it's okay for them to do it. It's not okay for Iran to do this. You cannot have international law and respect for each other unless it's applied equally. I mean, that's a basic premise of the law. It has to be equally applied to everybody. And, you know, we have a thing about Iran.
If this Iranian nuclear agreement is scuttled, and the U.S. is the only one that says it wants to scuttle it at this point.
Right.
The other four permanent members of the UN Security Council said, plus Germany,
right,
they're going to continue on with it. And Iran said, I think they're still going to continue on with it. But if they do that, can it survive? Can it move forward without the U.S.? The U.S. can't start a war. Well, it could start a war, but it wouldn't probably.
You know, we started the war on Iraq because we had Tony Blair in our corner. The UN voted against that.
Yes.
And we don't have Tony Blair anymore, so it might be harder for us to start a war all by ourselves, although we have a couple of very crazy people running the
Well,
country
in
right now.
2003, that's right, the UN Security Council did, it absolutely would not support a war. And a lot of people today believe that the invasion of Iraq was totally illegal. And
It was.
It was illegal, yes. And so you've got a situation where that basically started to destabilize the whole Middle East.
But
it
if
was
I'm
not just Iraq, but the countries throughout that region.
Exactly, but if I might say, we broke our word to the UN when Clinton bombed Kosovo. The Security Council vetoed that. We had absolutely no right to go in and start a war against Kosovo, no matter what they were doing. The only time you're allowed to attack another country is if you're under imminent threat of attack, and if the UN doesn't agree to it, that's it.
There was another area of the world, and we are about out of time, but it's North Korea. There was an agreement in the Clinton administration they had with Kim Jong-il.
The father.
Kim Jong-il,
The father.
And that agreement went on for a couple of 4 or 5 years, as I recall, and it actually was going to shut down the North Korean nuclear program. It was going to allow UN inspectors in. The North Koreans indicated the only thing they wanted was some food assistance, oil assistance. They didn't want to be overthrown. They didn't want regime change. And I'm trying to think the other thing, whether they would abide by that. Can we get back to that? Is that the way to go, to try to factor or to do a diplomatic arrangement with the North Koreans?
Absolutely. I mean, North Korea is not going to attack the U.S. with nuclear weapons. It's holding that. After all, Hussein wound up dead, Gaddafi wound up dead. They gave up their nuclear weapons and we dethroned them. So he's not stupid, the guy in North Korea. He's got his protection there, and I'm sure he's willing to give it up if we wouldn't go. We haven't had a peace treaty since 1953. We have 38,000 troops on their border, so there's so much we could do to make peace in the world. There's so much.
Basically, just an armistice is all it is. It's just we're going to stop fighting, but we're still not at peace with one another.
Right.
Yeah. Well, this one bright spot that came out of the recent Winter Olympics was that the North and South Koreans worked together on the Olympics. I think they were under one flag at that time. So there is the possibility of some type of détente, some type of dialogue between the two Koreas.
Oh, and there was huge grassroots pressure on the South Korean government, on our government, on, to make this truce, this Olympic truce. And then our government was just so rude and awful to the way they behaved.
In the last minute we have, what do you see as our major challenge in looking at this whole nuclear threat issue?
Well, to ratify the ban treaty, we need 50 government legislatures to have to vote for it. We have 5. We got over 54 signed already, but then it will be law. It will be, it's becoming law now, but then it will be, it'll enter into force is the language they use. So that's the most immediate goal. And then to stop the U.S. militarism. I mean, NATO should stand up to us. It's going to have to come from the grassroots. People are going to have to tell their governments. We should be telling members of the Senate in the U.S. and parliaments all around the world that even if your government isn't ratifying the ban treaty, there's a parliamentary pledge at www.icanw.org that you can go and ask some So let's get this momentum going that the whole world wants to ban the bomb.
And this is so absolutely critical because we will not survive a nuclear exchange. And even if there's not an intentional nuclear exchange between or among countries, if there were some type of accident that took place, accidental firings or whatever, it could create the most devastating situation because the firepower of these nuclear weapons is just unbelievable. And we will, as you mentioned earlier, have a nuclear winter. We'll see that the climate's already changing with climate change. This will even worsen the situation, and we will find ourselves where we can't grow food, the water will be polluted. It will just be an absolute disaster, and climate change may kill us all anyway before it's all over. Some people are saying the planet may be uninhabitable by 2100, but this one would certainly do it in a heartbeat. But Alice Slater, these issues are so very important, and I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.